off the wrong person. So where are we at now? Boy, we're getting a big lineup here. So number 5, and we have.
See, you thought the blinky thing wouldn't be helpful. That's really helpful.
I'm just looking at the numbers.
Yeah,
It's like, I'm so glad this stuff is numbered. So this is Connor from Scotland and wants to know if I believe in free will and why. And this is a huge topic, but it depends on how you define free will. So how are you defining free will, Connor?
So I would start off by asking, what is the will and what is it free from? To me, it would just be the freedom to act in accordance with your desires. A lot of people have suggested that they are moved by the past.
Oh,
hello?
Okay.
Hold on just a minute, Connor. I can hear you, but what's the question, Phil?
Oh, it just sounds like a guy whose name starts with the letter Hamish.
No, I don't. It does it? I don't know. But anyway, Connor, you're saying that okay, so Connor, I can hear you. Let me just reframe and you tell me if I'm right. So you're saying that the way you would define free will is, can you act in accordance with your will without being like coerced by another agent? And that's what you would call free will? And you're comfortable with that definition?
Yes.
Okay, I'm comfortable with that too. And yes, I think that I sometimes act in accordance with my will without being coerced by other agents.
Right. Okay, well, that's fine. It's just that I'm personally a compatibilist, and that I think that although determinism's true, it doesn't mean that there's no free will, because I am essentially part of the determinism that's determining as an agent. I'm acting, I'm not moved by the past. I just, live in the present. So another thing that I was going to bring up was, what is your opinion on objective morality?
Okay, and the question then becomes like, how are you defining objective morality? Because there's a couple different ways that people look at it.
Yeah, Sam Harris would be an ethical naturalist and say that you can reduce oughts to statements about biology and value to brain states and things. Do you agree with that?
Now, can you repeat that one more time?
Are you an ethical naturalist like Sam Harris? Do you think that you can get moral oughts from biology, for example?
I do think that you can reduce morality. I think that it starts out with kind of trying to define what it is. So when I look at morality, I kind of look at the idea of what do social species use to, like when we test for morality in other species, for example, we look for certain metrics of things like, does this other species have guilt? Do they have things like feelings of obligation or reciprocation? Are they
altruism?
Right. Yeah. Will they help each other? Like things that we would look at. Fairness. A sense of fairness is a big one. And there's like some studies that show that some species have a sense of fairness that is like much more rigid than other species. Like I remember reading about, I think it was dogs, and they said that the dogs would perform, and if you gave them both a treat, they would both seem to be appeased in the laboratory environment as long as they both got a treat, and it didn't really matter the quality of the treat. Now, and I'm not talking about people at home doing this with your pets who know that this kibble's better than that kibble. I'm just saying the dog gets a treat in the lab and he's happy and he's not worried about what the other dog got. But when you get into primates, you start to see more of a, wait a minute, they got that treat and I got this treat. This treat is not that treat, right? So they have a more of a sense of fairness that is a little more complicated and gets more toward what we would look at as fairness. We tend to look at like the quality of the treat. And so I think that when you start to, first of all, we have to look at what are we calling morality and what are those metrics that feed into what we consider moral. And once you can look at other species and start testing for things like this, you are beginning to define what you categorize as moral in I guess what you're saying, a biological sense, right? I mean, that would feed into the biological concept of morality. Correct?
But to me, there's no ultimate grounding why we ought to prefer the innate values that our biology gives us, although it's just a fact of our behavior that we do.
Okay, now wait. That's a different question, because now what you're basically saying is, I don't know that there's a requirement for me to go with that morality. right? Like, so there's a question, first of all, of whether or not there is this thing called morality. And I say that, yes, they are looking at it and defining it in a biological way, because otherwise, what are you talking about, right? You've got to understand the influence that is driving this thing that we're calling morality. And once you have that understanding, you can start reducing it a bit. And I don't think that it necessarily comes to the conclusion that in a particular situation there is like one best option. Sometimes, like in my job, for example, there are ways to do things that are equally as good. You could have several ways to do it that are going to work out to be just as cost effective, just as time effective, and so there could be multiple moral ways of handling even the same situation that are equally as good. I don't think that there's necessarily a best number one way to do something, even if it turns out that you could reduce it in that way. Now, what you're saying is, I don't know that the biological imperative toward those drivings in a person or in another species are something that from a cognitive perspective, I need to necessarily accept as how I ought to behave. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And so I understand what you're saying, and I think that's an interesting question.
Because it's a common fallacy, the naturalistic fallacy or appeal to nature, that just because something's natural doesn't make it good.
Correct.
And also this idea of trying to derive an ought, what you should do.
Would you agree that these tendencies, these moral tendencies that we were just describing that might be tested for in another species, would you agree that those tendencies do lend themselves to social bonding, like efficiency in social species? That those are the types of things that allow us to bond and have a society?
Yeah, practically. Like,
right.
We generally apply I totally respect ethical naturalism in that sense. I think it's as good as you're going to get, but it's just a kind of result of metaphysics, if you like, that there can't be any kind of you can't really derive an ought from an is. But Sam Harris thinks that's it's not really that important or big of a deal.
Well, I guess my question is, would you want to see the breakdown of society? And in my book, these things are really, really big when it comes to keeping people socially connected and, I hate to use the word controlled. It's not controlled in a negative way, but controlled in a way that allows us to network and connect and to actually build socially positive things. Now, to be fair, those same types of connections can allow us to build socially negative things, right? I mean, we could go off and start limiting or directing those things in a way that it appeals to maybe some segment of society against another segment of society. And we see things like that, right, where people will start saying something like they get afraid of somebody who's gay or afraid of somebody who's trans, and so they start feeling like they're doing good by persecuting these people. And so you can actually use these same sort of things as like, I want to protect other people, and I'm doing that by harming this other group because I have this irrational fear. So it's weird how it can be misdirected as well. So I would say that even in your question, even if somebody accepted that, these things are helpful metrics, they're also, like any tool, could be misused and misdirected in a way that makes them harmful.
Yeah, just the guy that called in the two last callers that brought up naturalism. Mm-hmm. Naturalism is actually the belief that everything can be studied or potentially studied under the natural sciences. So it's got nothing to do with immaterialism, because that's idealism. Materialism and idealism. You can still be a naturalist and be either. So like naturalism, it just means that, only the natural world exists, and that's what can be, I guess, fall under the domain of natural science, whatever that is. I mean, that's
right. But I guess I have a little bit better understanding of what you're describing, because what you're basically saying is that which can be studied, like that which can be observed and actually studied in a way that gives us information and meaningful feedback, right? I mean, is that fair?
It was also the reason why materialism became physicalism, because waves are not material, but they're still under physics and they're still natural. So it's like naturalism's the broader set.
I feel like your definition is more useful. definitely, because the other one was, like you were saying, you could throw out numbers, and numbers are not material, and yet, there they are, right? We use them.
Yeah. Methodologically.
All right, well, I'll tell you what. I want to, first of all, say thank you very much for your call. We do have a lot of our lines are full, but I really want to thank you. I feel like your contribution was very interesting this week.
Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.